Hey, well, welcome back to Small Changes, Big Shifts, creating rhythm and resilience in your life, not only during this reset, but just in general throughout your life. So thanks for joining me. It's hard to believe we're starting our third week. This week, I want to remind you, we'll go Monday and Friday this week. On Motivational Monday, we have Bruce Daisley with us, and I'll introduce him in just a second. And on Fun Friday, we'll have my friend Tess Masters joining us. And then starting next week, we'll go to Wisdom Wednesdays. And so thanks again for joining me today on Small Changes, Big Shifts. Today's guest is Bruce Daisley. He was previously Twitter's most senior employee out of the United States in his role of vice president across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. He joined the company in 2012, having previously run YouTube UK at Google. He also has worked in the magazine publishing and radio industries, having gotten his first break by mailing a cartoon resume of his life to prospective employers. And that's going to tie in that cartoon in today's show. Bruce's passion for improving work led him to creating the podcast Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat on making work better. It became a #1 smash in the UK, also hitting the business top 10 in the US. Bruce, welcome to Small Changes, Big Shifts.
Hello there. Thank you for having me.
Well, we've been doing a series the last 6 weeks around creating rhythm and resilience during this universal reset, which you've also felt across the pond, as we like to say. And so, hey, how has COVID-19 impacted you?
Yeah, I think, it's been, there's definitely been stages of it. I mean, I saw someone tweet the other day that April was the shortest month in history. And it's strange because March felt like the longest. So it's sort of, there's this strange thing where when you do pretty much the same thing every day, you really struggle to differentiate between what's going on. And definitely, I don't know about your viewers here, but I was definitely having some very peculiar dreams, some anxiety dreams back in March. So, there's definitely been an evolving situation right now. I think there's a lot of us really just starting to wrestle with actually some of the bigger changes that might be going on. Something like, I think probably any of us who work in an office normally have probably seen a changing. It's like at the end of a school year, there's going to be something rather different that we go back to when we go back to it. So it's interesting. I'm sort of broadly just delighted I'm past this stress dream stage, if I'm honest with you.
We call March the longest year. That's what we've been calling it in the States. I'm going to be totally transparent to you and our listeners. You're the first guest I've had that I personally don't know. And so I don't know a lot of your story, so I can't harass you too much. So good for you or not so good for you. So Bruce, tell us a little bit about your experience in social media and Twitter and YouTube.
Well, So you mentioned the cartoon resume there. That was at the start of my career. A while into my career, I found myself working at YouTube, part of Google, and I guess I was quite fortunate to be there just as after Google bought it. Interesting experience for me, because what I realized very quickly was that some of the rules that you taught, sometimes when you ask advice from people, they'll give you rules. And one of the rules that it seemed that everyone had was that, you want to work on the biggest things that are worth the most to the company. And when I worked at Google, YouTube made no money for them. And a lot of people were wondering if it was a mistake that they bought it, because it just seemed like this anarchistic place full of dogs on skateboards. And simply because I was so enchanted with it, I just find it such a, it's a league different now, but 8 years ago, it was such a captivating place that it could capture my interest or my father's interest, or people who had children, it could capture their kids' interest. And so as a result of that, I was just intoxicated by working on it. And I put my hand up saying I'd love to work on that. Well, at the time, it was potentially sort of heading for the problem basket, and people were asking, will this ever be a success? And so when I put my hand up, remarkably, I was almost unchallenged. And it reminded me really that sometimes listening to this wise advice from people, the sage advice that you want to work on the best and the biggest thing, isn't necessarily always the right idea. clearly now we look at YouTube as this phenomenon, accounts for more viewing than Netflix. If it was a TV channel, it would do double the nearest TV viewing. So, we all know that that's the phenomenon now, but that decidedly was not the case 8 years ago.
Well, it's funny you bring up YouTube. I just broke, my quarantine. Besides going to my office and my home and the occasional grocery store, the last really 8 weeks, that's what I've done. And I just recently, like about 30 minutes ago, got back from Table Rock Lake, hanging out with my 27-year-old, 30-year-old nephew and their wives, and then my 16-month-old nephew. And I watched more YouTube this weekend than I've ever watched, being around that age group. So I can see why it is a big deal. Before we picked a movie to watch, we had to watch all the trailers, and then we had to vote. And it was just, so it's funny that I'm talking to you today. I always find that fascinating. Share with us. So on this podcast, which is it was a series that I did daily to help me actually navigate. I thought I really was doing it for the people that I served. And sometimes when you just get out of your own way, next thing you know, it helps you cope through one of the most stressful experiences of your life. And I want to say thank you to everybody that's been tuning in, because I realized last week it hit me like a ton of good bricks of how much you guys helped me get through March. And so get through April, how much you helped me get through April navigating this time. And so I was able to not be thinking about the fear. I was thinking about, how do I support you? And doing that, I supported myself. So there's that old theory. If you look for what you could do to help people, is to get through something is help other people. Next thing you know, you're helped. So on my podcast, which is going to help us make the turn to that shift that we're making. You have a podcast called Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat. I would like to have it say Eat, Sleep, Meaningful Work, Repeat. I'm adding the word in your own podcast. So we like to celebrate, guide, connect, which provide hope. So why did you start a podcast?
Yeah, I've always been fascinated with the energy of different groups of people. So if you join a company, and I went through school and college working in fast food restaurants, in bars, in hotels, to try and pay for my journey through. And it became very quickly, if you've ever done that work, that, by the end of the second shift, whether this is a good place or a bad place. You just know the energy that's there. And I was always fascinated because there often seemed to be no direct link between the boss and the culture. That's strange, because so often, most of the literature we might find ourselves picking up at station bookshops, or we might sort of glance over, or the articles we see talk about the leader as the most important person in the company. And resolutely, that wasn't the feeling that I had. Anyway, wind along the clock a few years, and I was working at Twitter. Any of us who don't work in technology companies were assailed with so many articles saying that their culture is incredible, their culture's this sort of adrenalized, caffeinated, special thing. And that decidedly wasn't my experience. And so, despite the former advertisement, I'd actually built a really good culture in Twitter in Europe. And I was sitting there thinking, okay, we've done a good job. And then somewhere along the way, probably about 4 years ago now, something went wrong and the culture took a turn for the worse. So having built something that felt special, and it felt like it was very high performance, very creative, now I found myself in a situation where it had all gone wrong. And probably in this situation, during the lockdown, probably a few of us have reached for cookbooks and maybe cooked things that we've never done before. And I was interested, what could any of us do to improve our team dynamics? Maybe if we're not the boss, is there anything that any of us could do to just improve our experience of work? And so that's what I set about doing. I set about sort of delving into the scientific literature, the papers, the things that were written. And what I discovered is there's so much extraordinary psychology and sociology and neuroscience, and there's so much incredible writing about improving work. Just very little of it reaches people in a job. So I was sort of back to the cookbook metaphor. I set about thinking, I wonder if these 30 recipes that I could write that would enable people to improve their team, enable people to improve their relationships with their colleagues. And so I did that. If anyone is interested, a lot of the working was on the website, eatsleepworkrepeat.com. And I do a weekly email that goes out in there, which is very much in the same vein, really. Psychology, neuroscience, what's the latest? And I want you to err on the side of evidence rather than on the side of opinion.
And what are some of the things that you've learned? I'd like to call that guidance. What can you share with people that are tuned in with us today or tuned in with us on a different day that you've learned that you found to be extremely helpful for you and your tribe?
Yeah, well, probably one of the biggest things for me was the importance of us getting ourselves to a state of equilibrium before we start. One of the things, probably, if we were sitting here and having this discussion before the world ended, we'd be sitting there saying that there was a phenomenon of burnout. And, it sounds like you sort of mentioned something adjacent to it yourself. But, a lot of us were feeling that work was overwhelming. We were pretty much unable to escape the demands upon us created by work. And it was having this societal impact where up to half of all office workers, but even educators or care workers, they're exhibiting signs of burnout. So I was compelled to try and understand what was the way around that. And what you discover very quickly is there's a lot of very small interventions that can have a small incremental impact on you. So you're never going to find one single thing that transforms your life, but a series of small interventions can push you in a gentle direction. So you're turning notifications off on our phone almost seems countercultural at times. But what you discover is that when you turn notifications off on your phone, and maybe I would suggest, start with turning email notifications off, it just renegotiates your relationship with the urgency of the demands upon you. We all know that we've got emails waiting for us, and to be constantly reminded of us, it steals into our subconscious, really, and it adds to the stress. I'm also a big fan of things like walking meetings. And so, if you look into the evidence behind walking meetings, they seem to be really powerful in service of us channeling divergent thought. If you're looking for new ideas for something, and it might be you're looking for new ideas to invite people around for dinner, or you might be looking for new ideas for something to inspire you. But it seems that talking about these things when we're walking produces more creative ideas. Less good for convergent thinking. So if you need to decide between two options, then walking probably isn't the best way to do that. But divergent thinking, walking is incredibly powerful. And so that was my feeling. There seemed to be like a lot of interventions that we can all make that would renegotiate our relationship with our phone, with our work, and just get us back to feeling better from the outset.
Well, as I mentioned at the start of the show, that I just literally got back to Kansas City from Table Rock Lake, and I had the pleasure of spending the last 3.5 hours with my 30-year-old nephew and his wife and their 16-month-old son, by the way, that we taught to say, "Hey, dude," this weekend, which is really fun. But we were talking about about productivity at work, and how one thing he says, in the morning I try to get my calendar ready, to get my emails done, and then in the afternoon I turn off all that and I focus on my spreadsheets or whatever I'm working on. So it sounds like what you're talking about, and that people can be more focused. So it's odd that we're having this conversation talking about it right now. So why did you pick the word eat? I can see the moving, and as a chiropractic, basically a neurologist that doesn't cut on people, I can see how moving would be great, as gives you creativity. I can see we're just kind of focused in on two, it helps as well. But talk about why you picked the word eat.
If you go to Spotify and you search Eat, Sleep, Rave, Repeat, there's a song of that title. And so all I did is I took the big song by Fatboy Slim and Calvin Harris, and I swapped out rave and I put work in. So Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat is hanging on the coattails of people far cooler than me.
We'll put that in the chat section here. Well, as you've been talking to people about eat, sleep, work, repeat, you've given us some good ideas, especially on the work part of it. What other guidance have you been learning from the people you've gotten to talk to throughout the country or throughout the world on those topics?
Yeah, so for me, more than anything else, I was interested in the components that would really help us understand what was good working and then engineer our way to do it better. And one of the things that I think I was really resolute on, it's sort of a big part of the book, is the importance, and I think probably reminded of it more now than ever before, but the importance of human synchrony. And I talk about this as sync in the book. But what you discover, let me give you some examples. What you discover is when human beings feel like we are in concord with other humans, it seems to change our experience. So that might be that if you've ever exercised alongside someone else, you discover that you appear to be able to perform far better than you believed possible. And it might be sort of going for a run or a cycle or a swim. You just seem to be you seem to be able to unlock some extra effort that didn't seem to be there before. But we can also see it when we witness the performance and the behavior of people in those situations. So I was really intrigued with an experiment where a psychologist took some rowers. So these are people who might typically row a boat, but in this case, he took them, they were used to rowing together, and he took them and he put them on rowing machines. So he wanted to know what would happen. And he put the first group on rowing machines individually. And this was an experiment by a guy called Robin Dunbar and a woman called Emma Cohen at Oxford University. And they put them individually on rowing machines, asked them to row for 10 minutes. Then they took another group and they said, right, remember when you were on the boat, how you row in time with each other, in sync with each other. We want to observe what happens when you do that. So we want you to row in time with each other. Effectively, the experiment was almost identical. They did about the same amount of exercise. But then when you look at the pleasure hormones, the endorphins of the rowers who rowed in sync with each other had endorphin levels that were twice the level of those who'd rowed alone. Why? Because when we feel connected to other people, it transforms our experience. And you might do this if any of you sing in a choir, you'll observe exactly the same things subjectively. Or if you've ever found yourself dancing with other people, the endorphin levels go through the roof. It's why these things can be sort of almost inexplicably joyous. And that became something that I became intrigued by. Right, so when we feel connected to the people around us, it sort of enhances our experience. It transforms our experience of things. Now, obviously, how are you going to appropriate those things for work? Most of us are not going to have a morning dance routine when normalcy returns. We're not going to find ourselves having a morning sing-song. But what you discover is actually that some of the other behaviors that we do have in the office unlock these things. So face-to-face conversation seems to activate these endorphins. Laughing with colleagues seems to be one of the most powerful things we can do. So it seems like some of the things that forge connections with other people really transform our experience. Now, I guess more than ever before, that's very, very pertinent to the situation we're all currently living in. You know, the combination of social distancing and maybe being removed from casual and close relationships actually is having an impact on our experience. And I think it's just an important reminder that first and foremost, humans are social, and even the introverts amongst us, we're immensely social. And remembering that we need to unlock that is really critical.
You know, Bruce, I'm curious, when you think about pre-COVID, what was your biggest concern pre-COVID?
I mean, I've got a leak on my roof, candidly. Every time it rains, it was cascading onto my bed.
Now, what's your biggest concern? I'm going to call it during COVID because we're not post-COVID yet. What's your biggest concern now?
You know, I have moments where I worry that I'm going to die, but more vividly, my 96-year-old grandmother got bored of the lockdown last week and got a public bus to a local suburb, and so it's just like existentially the threat to my family from this situation, to be honest.
Well, I'm going to put a question out there for everybody that's listening today. And this is going to be a new question I've not asked you, but I'm curious about what you have heard the last month or what you're hearing today that you're going to add into your well-being routine. And I want to give a shout out to Eleanor for making sure she puts the links in the chat. Thank you, Eleanor, for doing that. So Bruce, when we were coming on the show, you talked about laughter. And once again, I'd like to celebrate what we're already doing, celebrate great people. I think so many times we're looking for what's next instead of saying, you know what, I'm already doing these great things. Let me keep doing those. And then you've given us some guidance that we've not gotten this month about notifications. And what other guidance would you share, and maybe make sure laughter is included in that?
Yeah, well, let me tell you something. So, the reason why I became so intrigued with laughter is that I found myself in a situation where you've probably sort of got this shortcut in your head as well. That when it comes to working, when it comes to getting serious business going on, people, if we walk past people falling around laughing, we believe that actually they're not doing the important stuff. They're wasting time, right? We associate laughter with indolence, and definitely that was the little belief that one of my old bosses had. One of my old bosses said to a group of us when we maybe had been seen laughing at a bad time. He said, now is not the time to be caught laughing. And so, it was a big thing in my head. Right, okay, gosh, is laughter really bad for work? And so, as I was completing my book, I was intrigued. I thought, I need to go and research this, because if laughter's bad, I've got to explain to people why it's bad. I've got to give them the inside line. And what you discover very quickly is I was fortunate to contact the world's leading laughter expert, and he passed in last October. He passed away. So I feel immensely honoured, because I'm so thrilled with the work of Professor Robert Provine. And Robert Provine was really sort of an iconoclast, because he said that he started researching laughter, and he said the whole of academia sort of often hesitates from researching things like laughter because they seem trivial. When you've got COVID, when you've got cancer, when you've got heart disorders, to be researching laughter seems like a sort of first world problem. It feels like an indulgence. Anyway, he said that there was somewhere in the region of 100,000 academic papers on anxiety and depression, and there's around 120 on laughter. So it's a barely researched science. And here's how he found himself getting intrigued by it, because he invited college students, the most tested group in history. He invited your average college students in, and he sat three of them down in a room and started showing them some comedy clips. And he learned the lesson that probably all of us would realize immediately. He realized that strangers plus comedy does not equal laughter. And from that, there was an insight. Yeah, you know it, because if you sat down with strangers on maybe a bus from the airport, you found yourself sitting with strangers on a flight, and something funny happened, you wouldn't fall about laughing as you might with your family, your friends, your children, your loved ones. And so there was an interesting insight there. And what he discovered, Robert Provine, is he discovered that laughter is a way for us to signal togetherness with other people. It's a way that we signal that we are part of something together. And it's really interesting. The more you look at these things, the more that you can see these things have parallels in the animal kingdom. Dogs do something called downward. They do. You'll see it's familiar with it. Yoga fans will know downward dog. And dogs do something similar. They literally, when they put their head and their front paws down, it means what's about to happen now is just joking. It means if a dog does that and then goes to bite the other dog, they all know this is just how remarkable that this is sort of programmed into them. And so we've all got these little signals that try and signal togetherness. The way Robert Provine said it, it really stuck in my head. He said the way to think about laughter is that it's an impoverished version of a human bird song. So what he says is when birds sing, a bird across your neighborhood, 3 or 4 birds might sing, and they're signaling that, they're signaling their position, they're signaling they're together. Quite often, some of them sing in chorus, they're connecting with each other. And he said that's what laughter does. It's when we go into a group, and he said there's a strange thing that when you go into a workplace, he said the things that people laugh at if they're in the office together are often not very funny. He said, people will come into the room and people will say, well, it's Michelle's turn now, and everyone will laugh. Or someone will say, good luck with that, Eleanor, and everyone will laugh. And they're not actually that funny. And he said, what happens is, it's basically us humans sort of signaling that, like downward dog, like no harm will pass here, that this is just a safe environment to be in. And it's such an intriguing discovery. So, firstly, laughter signals togetherness. But then you look into more of the evidence on it. So, laughter is one of the most powerful things that if you chat to combat soldiers or firefighters, they'll often describe to you quite vivid, dark humor that they have, that they share jokes. Why? Because it seems to reset their resilience. If they joke about the rather bleak situation they're in, it seems to give them a rebalancing, a re-equilibrium. So I think that was the critical thing for me. I posted on Twitter last week. I posted a question for people, and I think it's especially there's a lot of us who live alone, but there's also a lot of people who might be removed from some of the things that bring us everyday delight. And I said to people, "Are you laughing more or less than you were before?" Well, 2/3 of people said they're laughing less than they were before, and for me, that's one of the tragedies of this: is that there's something so wonderful about that abandon of laughing with people. And I guess it's that signaling that the world's safe. And so if we've eliminated a degree of everyday amusement, there is a degree of tragedy about that to me.
So that's one of your tips to stay well is to laugh. And interesting enough, we did we were supposed to have a Dr. Terry Walls, who's out of Iowa, an MD who has basically went from being in a wheelchair to walking. She has MS. And we did, instead of doing our book tour live, we actually did a Zoom call with about 100 people from around the region to talk about that. And one thing, the way we ended that call was a minute of laughter. And that was one of her advice, and she's very well researched. So I continue to see the validation of the things you're saying. And I think that's what's so fun about getting to talk to people like you, Bruce, is that the commonalities of what we can do to be well are pretty common. It's not something that's far-fetched. Eat,
Absolutely.
sleep, move, laugh.
Absolutely. But tell me, how did you get everyone to laugh?
Well, she started laughing. She said, okay, we're going to do a minute exercise and everybody's going to laugh. So she started laughing with the goofy laugh, and then other people started laughing, and then other people started laughing. And then we had 100 people laughing for right around a minute. And what we know from the neuroscience is it changes. It changes, like you said, it changes endorphins. As a chiropractor, and when you laugh, you got to breathe deeper. And what I find when I adjust somebody, that after the adjustment, because they're resetting, they take a deep breath. And that deep breath helps them reset their nervous system between the sympathetic and parasympathetic. So there is a lot of science. I'm glad you're sharing that. And Michelle, what a great point. It does bring a new meaning to Bob Hope's USO tours around the country. What other little habits can you recommend that you've heard that you think will be helpful to my listeners today?
Yeah, just probably the most important thing is making sure that you feel like you're in charge of negotiating your relationship with your work. So that will be, there's some wonderful research where actually we often discover that maybe switching off email in the evening, we often feel like, oh, well, I'm not able to do that. My boss needs me to be connected. And what you discover is whenever that's been properly researched, the bosses are far more understanding than we imagine. If you say, hey, I'm not going to be around tonight, tomorrow, or Wednesday night because, I'm doing stuff, very often they'll say, okay, that's fine. Or if you say, hey, just out of hours, if you ever need me, send me a text or a Facebook message or whatever, and I'll respond then, or call me, heaven forbid, but call me and I'll respond. But generally, I'm trying to manage my own mental health by staying off emails in the evenings. And the researcher who did a lot of work on this discovered that even in jobs where they felt like there was very limited separation between work life and home life, actually laying down those ground rules often led to people feeling happier, feeling more balanced, feeling less overwhelmed. And I think that's probably one of the critical things that I would say, really.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you brought that up. One thing that I always like to tell my staff is that we are not doing neurosurgery, we're not doing brain surgery. And so you do not need to respond to my emails. Just because I'm getting it off my plate does not mean that you need to respond tonight. If I need you, I'll call you. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think it's something to really say to people.
It's a really interesting one as well, because what you said there is that quite often people might say, so we used to have an issue. We had an issue at my former employers that we had a lot of people quitting with no job to go to. Really interesting, because it's such a vivid signal, right? Someone quitting with no job to go to is basically saying, I'm going to take my chances out there in this in this sort of wild and wicked world. I'm going to take my chances, and fingers crossed I'll find something before I starve to death. But I can't hang around here any longer. Right? Wow, what a signal! And so we started asking why, and what we discovered was that because a lot of people were just getting it off their plate and emailing on Saturday morning, and then Saturday afternoon, and then Sunday evening, and then people were finding they couldn't switch off from work. And so we just said, okay, here's the rule. There's probably going to be one weekend a year where we all need to be all hands to the pump, and we're all got to be on email all weekend. But that's not every weekend. So we were operating a no-fly zone of weekend emails.
Love it.
And look, we said, look, there's no issue in charging your planes. You reply to as many emails as you want, but just don't press send on them. Or in fact, now most email clients allow you to sort of to line up the send for Monday morning. But we said no more pressing send over the weekend. And very occasionally, because we'd all sort of bought into this, very occasionally a senior boss would press send on an email at the weekend. And what you generally discovered was people would say, hey, just a quick one. I wonder if we could pick this up on Monday, because we've all agreed to try and avoid weekend emails. And it was transformative. It seemed so silly, seems so trivial that it would make a big difference, but it just transforms the energy. And what you discover is people come back to work on Monday with just a bit more, they've just switched off, they've had some escape. And I'll give you one other thing on that. Here's one thing I became really intrigued with. It was how our brains work. So you mentioned neuroscience there. So let me delve into my idiot's exploration of neuroscience. And what you discover about sort of formative neuroscience is they say that there's broadly three systems of cognition. And you'll probably know this better than me, Michelle. But there's broadly three systems of cognition. The first one is what we're focusing our attention on at any point. So that is the executive attention network. And that's you typing an email on your computer, executive attention network. Second one is the salience network. So let's imagine where you're typing that email, and you're typing that email walking on your phone, walking down the street. And so what happens is, while the executive attention network is typing that email, the salience network acts as like this force field, stopping you bumping into people, stepping into traffic. But there's a third network, and it's actually when we started doing brain scans, and it's far younger science than you might imagine. It's about 20 years old, but brain scanning was of any sophistication. When we started scanning people's brains, scientists were fascinated with why people's brains were lit up while they were doing the Rubik's Cube. They were lit up while they were doing something interesting. But then when they stopped doing that activity, their brain lit up, but in a different place. And so they'd say, oh, but what are you doing now? Because we thought we'd just asked you to stop doing stuff. And people would say, oh, I was bored. I was daydreaming. I was a million miles away. And so the scientists gave this state of your brain being in a sort of unfocused situation, they gave it the name of the default network. But here's the strange thing, is that when we say to people, and I'd ask you, here's your homework, when we ask people to recollect on when they had a good idea, they'll often describe a situation where they were using the default mode of their brain rather than something more active. So, people will say, yeah, and I'd ask you to think about it, but next time you have a good idea, people say, oh yeah, I was walking the dog. Oh, I was just staring out the window. I was on the way somewhere and I was just thinking about something. You know what? I don't remember where I had it. I was just like, I was making myself a coffee. My favorite example of it is the writer of the West Wing TV show, Aaron Sorkin, sort of famous, revered dramatist, and very famous for writing witty dialogue. And he realized he was having all these best ideas for funny lines, good bits of plot. He realized he was having his best ideas, not when he was sitting at his computer screen, but when he was in the shower. He had a shower installed in the corner of his office. He says he has 6 to 8 showers a day. Now, I'm not proposing that that's anyone's lockdown routine, but what I am saying is actually those moments where our brain has switched off might be far more powerful. You might have this. people used to say to me, I have all my best ideas on vacation. I have all my best ideas when I've put my device away, when I'm thinking about other things. And so back to us banning weekend emails, that no-fly zone probably was in service of us being a bit more imaginative, creative.
Well, for those of you that have been listening over the last month, you know that I talk about how I get my best ideas in the shower, typically in the shower or my last hour of sleep when I'm kind
Absolutely.
of starting to wake up in that different sleep zone. So such a good wisdom, so much fun. So I'm curious, is there a habit that you've embodied the last 4 to 6 weeks that you're going to take forward in your life post-COVID?
Yeah, I think more than anything else, I've been trying to optimize to not feel too overwhelmed, and I tell you how it failed, because I found myself at the start of this thinking, right, okay, well, all my plans for the year are now suspended. All the things I was going to do, all the work I had lined up, all got cancelled. And so I immediately thought, right, I need to be now more productive. I set about trying to get a book proposal completed. I set about sort of trying to do 6 to 7 hours a day of research. And what I realized was I was sort of making myself slightly unhinged by the obsession of trying to get more done. So I've kicked back a little bit from that. Just try, I think, be a bit more forgiving on myself, I think, rather than erring on the side of believing that I was somehow failing.
Well, when we go back to the first week of doing this series, Rhythm and Resilience, the word that I kept hearing over and over from our guests was give yourself some grace.
Mm,
Give yourself some grace. And it's what it sounds like to me is you were giving yourself some grace.
far more elegant way of saying it. Absolutely spot on.
Well, great. Well, what are your hopes? If you had a magic wand, what do you see for the world, for your own world, and for your own world, and then for the world?
I mean, I'd murder the opportunity to be in an even mediocre restaurant right now. But look, I would hope that there's going to be a degree of good things from this. The really interesting thing is that I do think our relationship with the office, with work, will probably change to some extent. Why? Because I spoke to a friend of mine who works at a big media company, and he said we used to have 1,200 people come in here every day. The last 8 weeks, we've had 30 people, and the product has been exactly the same. And so he said, anyone who believes that's not going to have an impact on how we run our business is bananas. And I thought, okay, it's good. Let's get ahead of that, because there's often a reluctance for all of us to want to leave the past behind. Why? Because we've mastered it. I've got the past sorted. Don't take the past away from me. That's where I'm best. And I think a lot of us are in a situation right now where, unless we're careful, our fondness for the way things used to be might be our biggest disadvantage right now. So, all of us who are interested in putting some of these ideas into practice, we're never going to get a better opportunity, I think.
I cannot agree more with you. When I'm talking with clients, I've been going to the office 3 days a week for the last month and seeing patients, and what I'm hearing from them is going back. And but I've been pretty efficient when I've been at home. And so my suggestion, if you've loved working from home, is to be proactive and tell your leader about how it's been effective for you and some of the benefits you see. What do you think about that, Bruce? How would you guide somebody who says, what, I like my new work setup? And
absolutely. Look, the feeling resolutely that I had is that there's far more in our gift than we can possibly imagine. And yes, no doubt there are some tyrannical bosses, and maybe now, never more than before. But broadly, a boss has got the same objective of you, to get the work done. And so, I've often found that a degree of opening dialogue, while it might initially feel uncomfortable, often leads to good results. So absolutely, if people are finding that things they're doing right now are working, then I would suggest very strongly that they don't hold their tongue, and they tell people that.
yeah, and I know someone said, well, my boss should think about it. I'm like, they've got so many different things they're trying to
Absolutely.
juggle. And so
Bring
I
your
would
boss
say,
the
what,
answer.
I would be proactive if this is the life you want to live. And I think that's probably what's been one of my biggest gifts from COVID is, you know what life do I want to live? And I'm actually in my home office right this minute, and I love it. And I love doing a live show, and we'll talk about how that's going to change going into next week. If you have questions, this is a great time as we're starting to wrap up the show with Bruce. Bruce, what have I not asked you that you would like to share with my audience today?
I think, what would I say? I think, we're in a strange time right now. I think there will be probably more change than we would expect. I don't think it's fully equitable. So, one of the challenges is that I'm immensely envious of your home office, but many workers in their 20s and 30s were just about trying to work out how they were going to afford somewhere to live. And so, the one thing that we are probably recognizing is that this new world of work isn't evenly distributed. The amount of people that I've joined calls with this week who I've witnessed them dialing in from, a kitchen chair. I've witnessed them dialing in from, sort of a crammed apartment. And we can often forget. I was on something with some business school professors, and they said, well, we've all got our home offices resolved now. And most definitely, there are definitely a cohort of people with your glorious plant there and that wonderful, that wonderfully composed room. There's definitely people who have lucked out with a great situation. I think right now, extending a degree of empathy to those of us who aren't in that fortunate situation will probably help us understand the full nuance, the full complexity of this situation. So that's what I would say, thinking about those workers who are already sort of battling with how am I going to make my first steps on the property ladder or have any degree of success. And, the challenge for those people is it seems already now that people are telling them they've failed because they don't have a home office.
Well, that is some great Monday motivation without a doubt. Bruce, what's the best way for our people to find you?
Yeah, I just hit it there. So I've just sent a link to my newsletter there. So my newsletter sort of goes out every week. In the course of like 100 podcasts, I've interviewed some truly wonderful people. But what I've realized is not everyone likes listening to podcasts. Not everyone likes. I'm not a podcast person, they tell me. Okay, I hear you. Then I will now send you an email, and be careful what you wish for. And so the email there, and what I try and do there is really sort of curate the non-BS version of what is going on right now, and try and broadly, I try not to bring my own opinions into it, but more curate the evidence that I see in front of us.
Well, great. So we've celebrated you. We're encouraging people to celebrate what's working in their life. And I'd love to hear about that. If you don't have time today, be thinking about that question for our Friday show on Fun Friday. You've given us some good guidance. For me, I was thinking about how do I learn the technology so I don't push send over the weekend. And I'm committed to doing that now with you. Bruce, thanks for doing that. I guess I could leave it in my draft file, but I would like to learn that technology a little bit better. So thank you for that. You've given us some ways to connect, which gives us some hope. So thanks so much for joining me today. I want to, first of all, when you get a chance, tell your team, thanks for reaching out to me. A lot of people say, how do you find these guests? And you know what? A lot of times they find me. Probably, if not daily, every other day someone reaches out and says, by the way, I have this great potential guest for you. The good news is I know a lot of fabulous people already. And plus you guys have given me some ideas. And then I get a chance to read bios. And Bruce, out of the probably 40 people that have reached out to me the last 60 days, I've picked 2 people. And so I was really intrigued with your Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat podcast. So you came through. I sifted through, as somebody said in one of our earlier shows about sifting. So I want to tell you a little bit, Bruce, as we wrap up. So I want to thank you for the knowledge and the wisdom you share with me today. Patty B says, thanks for being you. Great words of wisdom. Michelle, thanks COVID. And her work at home space. I think I just got a huge aha that everybody's not as lucky as I am. I don't know why I did not make that own connection myself. So thank you for that. Michelle, I got lots of people working at their dining room tables. Just some really great ahas today, and laughter and creativity. So thank you again for joining me on Small Changes, Big Shifts.
Thank you so much.
Great. So for all of you joining me live today, once again, we'll have Tess Masters, the Blender Girl. She'll be on the show Friday. I know, Liz, that you have done a lot of work with Tess and Karen, and we'll appreciate that. Tess has been a friend of mine for about a decade, actually, almost exactly a decade. And she's a fabulous Australian person that will be on. She lives in LA now, so she'll be joining us. And then on Sunday, I'm going to encourage you to tune into my podcast this Sunday. It'll be the last one of our current format, where it's a pre-recorded interview that I do. And then starting on Monday next week, on Memorial Day, we're going to share with you some of the shows that we've done over the last 6 weeks. And then the following Wednesday, we'll start our new series, Wisdom Wednesdays, where we'll be live with the guest. You will be getting to hear the show live, and it'll come out the following week for everybody else. I've had so much fun seeing your faces. It's nice to see you, Jerry and Pam. Michelle, I don't see your actual face, but I see your smiling face. And Deanna and Eleanor and Liz. And let me just scroll here and tell you who else is on. And Kathy and Diane and Patty B and Elaine. So thanks for joining me live today. And Bruce, have a wonderful day. To all of you out there, hey, go out and make it a great week. Lots of good stuff happening. So I'll chat with you all soon. Blessings to all of you.